Hello and welcome to Fade of PB8. Today we'll be doing a sorcerer that is holding a crystal ball. Now the crystal ball is going to be my main source of light here, so that's why I'm starting with it. Generally I start with the background or the easier objects that you aren't really going to notice too much, but whenever I have a light source on the paper, I like to start with that because that is going to affect the colors of everything around it. But it's its own independent color. It really won't matter, if the witch is wearing black robes or blue robes. The crystal ball is what it is. So that's why I'm starting with it. And when I do this, I'm going for kind of a cloudy look. So what I've done is I have like a yellow core that kind of got a little bit darker as it goes towards the edges. And then I'm kind of doing something similar with these greens. I kind of just drag the greens along randomly to create the illusion of some clouds going through. And then it gets a little bit darker and darker as you go outward. And then I did like a very thin yellow-green on the very outside edge, just to give the illusion that it's kind of like enclosed in a crystal, like a glass case. And I think it came out real nicely. So the crystal ball is a lot of fun. I highly recommend you try it out. Just print off a bunch of circles and just go at it. This was probably like my 30th attempt at doing a crystal ball, so it definitely took some practice, but it's a lot of fun. And what I really love about doing images with the light source on the paper is they're just much more challenging, but they end up looking really nice if you can pull it off. So now I'm doing the background, and pretty much everything is going to have some sort of tint of green. So these are green grays that I'm using right now. And by doing the background, I'm kind of establishing like how dark, like the darkest part of the image. So I have my lightest part at the beginning, that's the crystal ball. And then the darkest part is going to be kind of the tunnel behind the lady. And when I do this, there's a couple things to keep in mind. When you do a large open area, you're going to want to go over it a few times. And what ends up happening is the parts that are like along the edge, you go along slower. So the ink flows a little bit more. But then the big open areas, you just kind of gloss over and the ink doesn't really come out as much. So you want to go over pretty much everything at least 2 or 3 times. Now I'm using 80-pound paper, and with a thicker paper, you do have to go over it a few more times. But I definitely recommend something that's like 65 pounds or more. Printer paper just doesn't quite do it. So, here I am applying a yellow green, and this is going to be one of my common colors. So I have basically a set of common colors which are coming from the crystal ball, which are going to be used to indicate like a reflection of the crystal ball. You'll particularly see it on the woman's face. You'll see it on the book, a little bit on the stand. And here I'm for the archway. What I'm doing is I've got some browns that are actually kind of tinted green, and I'm just scattering them. And I'm also using some yellow grays and scattering those. And so I'm not really doing like an even distribution of ink. I'm just kind of scattering the colors around and then blending them together. And it just gives this more natural look. And the other nice thing about doing this technique is that it ends up saving ink for each marker. So instead of just using like one marker for all the bricks and using up all the ink from that one marker, what you're doing is you're using a little bit of ink from like a dozen markers. And that way your markers ideally will kind of run out at the same time, and then you replace the entire set instead of replacing one marker at a time. So here I'm doing the table, and again I've used those same greenish brownish colors for the table. And then I'm bringing in some warm grays and some yellow grays. So I'm kind of like, there's a lot of gray going on in this drawing, so I'm mixing together the grays with the greens. Now, if you want to do like a highlight color, what I recommend doing is you can put down like the natural color of the table, then put down some green, then go to a darker natural color, then to a darker green. And you can kind of jump back and forth between the natural color of the object you're drawing and the highlight color of the object that you're drawing. And then you'll find that nice balance between like how green or how brown you want something to be in this case. So for these candles, they do Now, I said earlier on I want to do my light sources at the beginning, and yes, these are little flames, little candles, but they aren't really going to be my light source. They're not really, in comparison to the crystal ball, they give off very little light, so I'm not really too worried about what's going on or any sort of reflections from the flames. Now, if the fire were a lot bigger, there'd be a different story, but in this case, they won't really affect anything. So you can kind of see that things have a tint of green to them, and what I did for that stand right there is I actually went in with the green markers first, kind of shaded it, and then I just brought on one marker, which is kind of like this pinkish brownish, and just went over the entire thing. So even though the base color is that pinkish brownish, I was able to shade it ahead of time with the highlight colors, and then come in with that pinkish brownish color, the base color. And I think it turned out real nicely. So for these lanterns, I'm gonna end up using the blender marker for the very first time, and I'll use it towards the end of these lanterns. But basically, I'm using some light greens to highlight the reflection of the window part of the lantern. But it ends up being a little bit too dark for my liking, so the base of the lantern is too bright compared to the glass. And so what I did right there, you can see it lightened up a fair bit. I just used the blender marker to lighten up the glass a bit. And for the book, I'm doing something similar. I'm just kind of jumping back and forth between, I start with the natural colors, and then I come in with the greens. And I could just kind of jump back and forth between the natural colors, the greens, my warm grays, until I finally get something that I like. Now, you'll notice that this image is AI generated. And now AI is a lot of fun to work with, and I highly recommend trying it out. But you might notice that the woman's right hand has a fifth finger, not including the thumb. And I actually crossed it out. So you have to really, when you get a new image, you really have to look at it carefully to make sure that every single part is doable. Because if I hadn't found a way to kind of erase that or hide that extra finger, it would ruin the entire image. So you want to make sure that when you get a new image, really scope it out. Just have a plan for everything. You can pull out your markers ahead of time. That's something that I often do. Not always, but a lot of times I'll bring out my markers ahead of time just so I have an idea of what it's going to look like. But yeah, scope out your images ahead of time, because you'd be amazed how many images are 99% of it is correct, but that extra 1% can really ruin an entire image just by itself. One extra finger would ruin the entire image. So now I'm doing the robes, and I started with the green grays. I wasn't really sure. I pulled out some purplish, bluish colors, but I ended up not using them. So I ended up just kind of going with these green grays, which is similar to the background colors. But then I ended up hitting the highlight a lot harder, just because she's so much closer to the crystal ball. And I saved the skin for last because the skin is usually the hardest part, and it's easier to work on something if the colors around it are already down on the paper. So by doing the robe and the hair before the skin, I can compare her skin color to her surroundings, and it just makes it a lot easier to make decisions, decide which markers to use, if you need to go darker, if you need to hit the shadows a little bit harder. Just by having all those colors down around it, it really gives you a good idea of what you're working with. And for the hair, now I start with a very, very light brown, and then I'm going to come in with the the greens to hit those highlights again. And you'll just notice how much her hair changes colors. I didn't really have a target for the final result of the color of her hair. I just kind of worked with the markers that I had, because hair has such a big range. It can be blonde, it can be brown, it can be black, it can be red. Heck, it could be purple if you really wanted to. But what really matters here is the contrast and hitting the shadows correctly and hitting those highlights especially. And for the skin here, you'll see that I'm just kind of jumping back and forth between the skin colors and the greens. And skin takes a lot of practice. the key thing here to be aware of is like it's a relatively small area and I'm going over it fairly quickly, which means that the paper can saturate very, very fast, which could cause some bleeding. So I just have to be careful not to go over it too many times in a short period of time. But overall, this turned out real nicely, so I hope you enjoyed and learned something. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.